Ever try to like capture that electric energy of a city at night? Or the subtle beauty of a dimly lit room. That's the allure of low-light photography, right?
Yeah.
And it's something, as I understand it, you've been itching to explore.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Now, you've been doing your homework, I hear it said. You've been diving into articles, specs, all that good stuff, I'm sure. But sometimes, all those technical details, they can feel like a tangled mess of jargon, right? Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's easy, I think, to get lost in a sea of megapixels and sensor sizes without really understanding what it all means for your photography.
Exactly. It can
Hmm.
be very confusing. So today, we're going on a deep dive into the science behind those stunning low light shots, and we'll be tackling those technical terms head on. But don't worry, this isn't a lecture.
Right?
We're going to break it all down in a way that's clear, insightful, and actually helps you take better photos.
Think of it as translating that tech speak into photographer speak. We're here to make sure you walk away with those aha moments.
Yeah, I love that. Now, one of the biggest myths out there, and this is something I know you probably heard, is that bigger pixels automatically mean better low light performance, right? Have you heard that one?
It's a common misconception. It's one of the first things people, I think, latch onto.
Right. It seems very, at first blush, very logical.
Yeah, people see bigger and think more light, but it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay, all right. I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
Okay, so imagine this. Your camera sensor is like a bucket collecting rain,
Okay.
and the lens is like a funnel guiding those raindrops, or in our case, photons, into the bucket. So wider frontal opening means more rain collected overall, right?
Makes sense. Yeah,
So a wider lens opening lets in more light regardless of the bucket size.
got it. Okay.
That opening is called the entrance pupil, and it's key to understanding why pixel size alone isn't the whole story. Two cameras, one with a larger sensor and one with a smaller sensor, can collect the same amount of light if their lenses have the same entrance pupil and field of view.
Like those rain buckets again. A bigger bucket won't help if the funnel is narrow.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's not just about the size of the bucket, it's about how effectively you're directing the rain or light into it.
Myth officially busted.
Yeah.
So bigger pixels don't guarantee better low light performance.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't explain the other big challenge, right?
Right.
Noise. Why are low light shots often plagued by that grainy, less sharp look?
Noise. The nemesis of every low-light photographer. It all comes down to two main culprits.
Sure.
Shot noise and read noise.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack those. Shot noise first. What's the deal with that?
Remember those photons or raindrops of light?
Yeah.
Well, they're not exactly falling in a nice orderly fashion. Light itself is inherently a bit chaotic, with those photons bouncing around in unpredictable ways.
So it's more like a wild hailstorm than a gentle drizzle.
Exactly. And just like you can't control the path of every hailstone, you can't eliminate the randomness of how photons hit your sensor.
Yeah.
That randomness is shot noise.
So even with the most expensive high-tech camera,
Yep.
there's always going to be some level of shot noise simply because of the nature of light itself.
Exactly. It's like that inherent grain you see in night vision footage.
Yeah.
Even though the technology is amplifying the available light, you can't escape the fundamental properties of light.
That makes so much sense.
Uh,
Okay, so if shot noise is about the light itself, what about read noise? What's going on there?
Read noise is a bit like static on a radio signal. It comes from tiny imperfections in the sensor's electronics. These imperfections can cause slight voltage fluctuations, which show up as noise in your final image. Think of it as those pesky little speckles, especially noticeable in the darker areas of your photos.
So it's like the sensor itself is adding a bit of its own grain to the mix on top of the shot noise from the light.
You got it. And this is where pixel size can sometimes play a role,
Okay.
although not always in the way people assume.
Okay, so I'm sensing another myth-busting session coming on.
Yeah.
But we'll save that for after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We're just getting started. So we've got these two noisemakers, right? Shot noise and read noise, wreaking havoc on our low-light photos. But before we get to those myth-busting details you hinted at, how does all of this tie back to something I can actually control, like the ISO setting?
Excellent question. ISO often feels, shrouded in mystery, but understanding how it interacts with noise is a game changer for low light photography.
It does feel like magic sometimes. You crank up the ISO and the image gets brighter,
Yeah.
but there's always that fear, right, of going too high and ending up with a photo that looks like it's covered in sand.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. It's tempting to think of ISO as a brightness style, but it's more accurate to think of it as an amplifier.
Okay.
So if you're shooting at a dimly lit jazz club, Your camera sensor is only picking up a faint signal, so increasing the ISO is like turning up the volume on that signal.
Okay, I see, I see. But if the music is already full of static, making it louder just makes the static more obvious.
You hit the nail on the head. A high ISO itself isn't creating noise, it's just revealing and amplifying the noise that's already present due to those, pesky photons and sensor quirks.
Okay, so ISO amplifies the noise that's already lurking in the shadows, so to speak, which brings us back to those myths you mentioned.
Right. One common misconception is that you can directly compare ISO values across different cameras.
Okay.
For example, assuming ISO 100 on one camera will produce the same level of noise as ISO 100 on another.
Oh, interesting. I thought ISO 100 was ISO 100 regardless of the camera.
Yeah. No, it's a common assumption, but here's where it gets interesting. ISO standards were initially developed for film photography.
Right,
Different film stocks had different sensitivities to light.
right. So a faster film with a higher ISO could handle dimmer lighting situations.
Precisely. When digital cameras came along, they adopted the ISO terminology.
Right.
But the way digital sensors capture light is fundamentally different from film.
Okay. So how do camera companies decide what ISO numbers to use for their digital cameras then?
It's a mix of technical specifications and, frankly, marketing.
Ah.
Yeah. Manufacturers want their cameras to sound impressive, so they might choose an ISO base level that sounds good on paper.
So it's like advertising a car as having a sporty engine, even if it's not a true performance vehicle.
A perfect analogy. The key takeaway here is to not get too fixated on comparing ISO numbers across different camera models.
So if ISO numbers aren't always a reliable way to compare cameras, what should I be looking at? Especially when it comes to low light performance.
That's where understanding the native sensitivity of the sensor, how it performs at various ISO levels, and this is important features like dual native ISO come into play.
Dual native ISO. It sounds like some kind of secret weapon for low light photography.
It kind of is. Remember how we talked about ISO being like an amplifier for your sensor signal?
Yeah. Turning up the volume even if the music is a bit staticky to begin with.
Exactly. Well, dual native ISO is like having two amplifiers.
Okay.
One optimized for like low volume situations, low light, and another for when you have plenty of signal, bright light. Think of it like having two gears in a car. One gear is great for cruising at high speeds, but you need a different gear for those low speed situations where you need more power and control.
Right.
Dual native ISO gives your camera that extra gear for excelling in low light.
Wow. So it's like Sony snuck a second super-powered sensor inside, just waiting to be unleashed in the dark.
You got it. It allows the camera to switch to a different base sensitivity level when the light gets really low, minimizing noise and maximizing image quality.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But how does the camera know when to switch between those gears? Like, does it do it automatically, or do I need to adjust settings?
Most cameras with dual native ISO handle the switching automatically.
Oh, okay.
They're smart enough to detect when the light levels dip below a certain threshold and seamlessly activate that second gear.
That's amazing. So less for me to worry about when I'm trying to capture that perfect shot in a dimly lit jazz club. Speaking of which, we've been circling around those Sony cameras, the A7i and the A7S III. They both sound incredible, but how does this all play out in the real world?
They're both fantastic cameras, but they really highlight the importance of understanding these technical nuances. The A7S III, with its larger pixels and dual native ISO optimized for extreme low light, is like that specialized tool, designed for a very specific purpose.
It's like having a high-performance telescope for stargazing. Incredible for that specific task.
Precisely. Whereas the A7IV, with its higher resolution and impressive dynamic range, is more like a versatile all-rounder. It can handle a wide range of shooting conditions exceptionally well.
Right. It's like having a Swiss Army knife of cameras.
Yeah.
Ready for anything.
Yeah. But, as we've learned, it's not just about these broad comparisons. You have to dig into the specifics of sensor design, read noise, dual native ISO, and how those factors interact at different ISO levels. Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting with the A7SDI. You see, it actually has a lower resolution than the A7IV.
Right. You mentioned that earlier, and I've been wondering about that. Doesn't lower resolution mean less detail in my photos? Why would I want that?
It's all about trade-offs. By having fewer but larger pixels, the A7S III sacrifices some resolution but gains an advantage in low light sensitivity. Remember those rain buckets?
Yeah.
Fewer, larger buckets mean each one can collect more rain.
Right.
And the A7S III also uses a clever technique called pixel binning.
Pixel binning. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Essentially, it's like those pixels team up to conquer the darkness. The camera combines information from neighboring pixels, acting as if they were one larger pixel. This further enhances its low light sensitivity and reduces noise.
So it's a trade-off. Fewer pixels overall, but each one is a low-light superhero. No wonder the A7S III is so well regarded for its low-light capabilities.
Hmm.
But if I'm not planning to shoot in near-total darkness, the A7IV's higher resolution might be a better fit for everyday photography, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It all comes down to your individual needs and the types of scenes you're most passionate about capturing.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Absolutely. And that's what I find so fascinating about this field. It's a constant process of discovery and understanding how these technical details translate into real-world creative choices.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into low-light photography, what's the most important thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Um, don't be afraid to explore and experiment.
Okay.
And remember, understanding the why behind those camera settings and technical specs is incredibly empowering. It allows you to make informed decisions and get the most out of your gear.
It's like the difference between simply snapping a photo and truly crafting an image.
Beautifully said. So the next time you're out shooting in a dimly lit jazz club or under a star-filled sky, remember what we've explored today. Look beyond the megapixels, dive into the sensor technology, and don't be afraid to experiment with those ISO settings and dual native ISO capabilities.
And above all, never stop chasing those magical low-light moments. Thanks for joining us on this illuminating deep dive.